Welcome to Basel 2025. Maybe this piece by Braco says it all. So slightly different selection this year, but every year we tend to try and show artists we've shown this year or going to be showing in a few months, but also showing a lot of works of artists that we have in our inventory. We have the Braco there, then we have this beautiful piece by Verena Losenberg, who I think is the most extraordinary painter. The technique is so pure. She only used oils, and one has to look at them to see that it's all faultless, which you can't say for a lot of painters nowadays. We had two shows this year of Noviella, who was a Brazilian pop artist who had been in the army and then became a self-taught artist, and it's full of the sort of sorrow and sadness of what was going on in Brazil at the end of the 60s. Alongside this piece by Feliza Bursztyn from Colombia, who died tragically early in 1982, but I think there's a very strong resemblance of pain and political upheaval. This year is celebrating the 100th anniversary of the gallery, and Paul Klee was one of the artists my father was first to show in England, and so this very remarkable painting of Galkashire, one of his early supporters, is here to celebrate that. Manzoni wigs, and really it sort of predates Warhol's Fright wigs, but it's quite remarkable, and it was a pleasure to have it alongside two Wifredo lambs from 1942, which have never been seen before. They were given to Lamb by a great friend, an architect friend of his, and they remained in the family ever since then. We've had a little bit of Latin America, so this is our Latin American corner. So here we have two beautiful works by Waldemar Cordeiro, also would be celebrating his 100th birthday this year. And there's a beautiful little show in Karlsruhe at the ZKM Museum, and also during this week there's a show of digital art, because he was one of the first digital artists, going from concrete through sort of proto-concrete pop to digital. But they're really extraordinary little things. Mira Schendel, and then there's Tomasella and Navigny. Now, the small paintings by Navigny are very rare because he only actually gave them to friends. So I'm not sure which friend that was, but I did buy two at one stage from Hans Meyer, and they'd both been given him as wedding presents. And for his 80th birthday, he wanted people to say things, and I just said that I hoped I didn't have to buy a third Navigny from him. Otasica and an Arcay. Arcay came from Cuba and painting for about just over 10 years in Paris, and then he came as a printmaker, seriographer, but then became the sort of seriographer to the stars of all the artists. But this is a sort of study for a mural, I imagine, that he did in Paris. A very interesting artist. From the Argentine, Raul Loza, which I think balance is very interesting there, and then Alice Round, who was involved in surrealism thing. From Brazil, Judith Laun, and I think the whole flow, you get an idea of what was happening there and then. And I think that at the time, what was happening in Latin America was as good as anywhere. I have a saying that there are three forms of art. There's international art, there's regional art, and bad art. And at this stage, what was happening in Latin America definitely was international art. A beautiful Fontana, which is a from 1960, which is a sort of prototype. You can see the egg, the whole surface is beautiful because the simple slashes are very simple. This has got tremendous texture, and you have the egg that then became the most famous egg shape with the holes in it. The last bit of Latin American for us is Cairoli, who he was obsessed with plexiglass. Whenever he made any money, he'd buy more plexiglass, which was very expensive at the time. So his son had a pretty miserable childhood. Then we have this really exciting, very active painting by Uca, who sadly died the other day. So this is a sort of, we have it as a memorial to him. At the moment in London, we have an extraordinary, beautiful show that soon there'll be a walk around coming onto your screen soon. I first came across him about 15 years ago in the Reynes Affair, in that room of sort of 1959-60s painting, and one just always struck me. There's something extra. He painted with his fingers and everything, and it might be a bit suggestive, but it's really, I think, very, very exciting. And we've sort of juxtaposed it with this piece called Lock by Tajiri, and I think the sort of well, not violence, but the sort of making something beautiful out of very raw materials. We assume the title comes because it's probably found objects of some form of lock. But again, his pieces were very sexual. Billy Apple, a self-portrait using this method he was allowed to use by Xerox. Then sadly, he died a couple of years ago, but he and his wife left Japan in 1958 and came to the States. But there's still, because they said there really wasn't a life for an artist like them in Japan. But this is one of the works from the 60s, and the texture and everything is extraordinary. And he was the sweetest, they were the sweetest couple. She, thank goodness, is still alive. And you go to their apartment in Midtown Manhattan with all the screeching and the horns and the trucks and things, and you went into their loft space, and it was pure Zen. It was extraordinary. You were transported out of New York for pure pleasure. Vera Molnar, who was basically preferred her computer printout. She thought that was more important than the drawings for it or any of her paintings. And if you think that, the size of the computer in those days was probably the size of this room, and they had to, and I love the fact it's got that, and it has the sort of client name and everything, and they all had to work at night, and the only computers were basically in universities. Dadamaino, so you've got the sort of holes or the squares coming through, and then this is probably the only ready-made Schoenhoven ever did, which came from his colleague Henk Peters to his son, and then this one, which is more typical. So it's gentle, you have strength and beauty. A painting by Girke, who I absolutely adore, and I really think that he did show with Raimund in the States, but it was at a time when it was virtually impossible to sell German art in America. It really didn't become saleable till the late 70s, when Xavier Fourcade had his first show of Baselitz. But this to me has all the subtlety and beauty of Agnes Martin of those times. The first of two Calzolaris, this one with an oyster shell, which we've placed above this mobile of Rebecca Horn, which has the sort of the pearls and a little dance. So that, and then this one, which we put beside Morale. And I think there's a whole conversation going on with that wall. We go to the troubled area of what, when I was young, was Eastern Europe. This is Filko from the 60s, and these missiles, unfortunately rather strategically placed over what's going on today. And then here we have a little piece by Koller, who we will be doing a show of in the fall. But you almost feel here he is holding one of, a Morale or a Girke, saying, hey, I can do this too. There will be here a beautiful new piece by Miguel Chevalier, who's had an incredibly successful year with shows everywhere. This Stanzac's just come back from a show in Potsdam to do with Kandinsky, and it was actually the poster for the show. And here is a truly extraordinary, I think, piece by Keith Haring that he did in 1987, I think somewhere in Switzerland, and there'd been a kite show or something, and he did this kite for a friend. And it really does show the absolute brilliance of how Keith could just completely, without any preparatory drawing, fill the thing absolutely brilliantly, and the humor of it. Some people think it's a dragon. I think it might be looking for the Canogar around the corner, but that's anybody's choice. A Sameti, who we've shown over the years, and I find him extraordinary where you think where you realize that that's only one color painted over a canvas that he's prepared and built up himself. But it brings many colors. It's like Warhol could make a black and white, and you'd think there were 7 colors in it. One series by Kirk Seligman from the late 50s, 1958, which Kirk Seligman was, to my mind, the greatest artist to have been born in Basel in the 20th century. And some of this series was shown in the late 60s at the Walker Art Centre, in the old building of the Walker Art Centre, before it was made the new building was made in 1970 or 71. He was on his own with this imaginary world. And in a way, this is the conception, the evolution about the near birth and the finished product. But they really, I think, are they're incredibly strong. One might think them menacing, but they're not. These are real museum quality paintings. And the last bit we have is these Klaus Stout, who we just had a show of, and Klaus Stout is still working, age 90-something, and these ones remind me of early Mondrian or leisure cubism. And here he's using cardboard because he claimed that wood was getting too expensive. And this beautiful little Dekkers used to belong to Dadamaino, so they can see each other together again. Do come if you can. There's a bit of everything for anybody, and we're very proud of it. And do come and see the Canogar show in London, that you'll see the walk around very soon. Thank you.